Hello again. So I was talking about the vagal paradox in the last video. I'm going to continue with that and share with you a way to solve the vagal paradox. Now, this is not my own idea. This spills out of Stephen Porges' polyvagal theory and why you should become acquainted with said theory. Thank you for tuning in. So, as I mentioned in the last video, right, this vagal paradox emerges where we have two functions, two physiological responses that appear to be the result of vagus, and yet they're almost opposing one another. Not so good. Enter Stephen Porges in the polyvagal theory. I feel like I should have a drum roll for that, but in fact I don't. So what polyvagal theory does for us would be, it solves this problem by basically saying there are two functionally distinct branches to vagus. So you have what's called the ventral vagus. That is the most developed portion of vagus that emerged most recently in human history, mammalian history. And what we see with that are the most advanced kind of operating of the system, right? When you're in ventral vagus, you can rest and digest, and he also couples with that this social engagement system. So our ability to connect is linked to our ability to be in ventral vagus, which has implications for trauma, especially chronic trauma that disturbs the social engagement system. So that these two distinct branches to vagus, like I said, ventral vagus and then dorsal vagus would be what we see when we observe immobilization and freeze, right? That is kind of an end of game scenario when we're seeing that, where it didn't work out with sympathetic, and now this is a last-ditch effort to survive. And so we're gonna let the most primitive portion of our nervous system do its thing, because nothing else has worked out to this point. That's what we see with vagus, with dorsal vagus. So let me give you three sort of guiding principles to understanding polyvagal theory. This is all coming straight out of Deb Dana and Stephen Porges' work. I in no shape or form I'm claiming these ideas as my own. I am merely expounding upon what I have read. So, principle number one for this whole polyvagal theory is that the system polyvagal theory proposes is hierarchical in nature. It is not this opposing brakes versus gas pedal kind of scenario. In fact, it is a signal light, let's say. And so you have basically at the top ventral vagus and this ability to socially engage. And when that can no longer be online, because that only happens in safety, when that goes offline, then it gives way to sympathetic, which then is the next developed state. And so we can then flee or fight and get out of whatever challenge that is. If we're no longer just in danger and now we're under life threat, well, then that's where freeze emerges. That's where immobilization and what he calls dorsal vagus happens. So hierarchical, that's principle number one. Principle number two would be this idea that the way your nervous system, autonomic nervous system, is evaluating and navigating which state to be in is based on this concept of neuroception. So neuroception is a term that Stephen Porges actually had to coin because it didn't exist. And the way he defines it would be this detection below the level of awareness. So it kind of precedes perception. And it happens in 3 different ways, he says. So way number 1, or sub deviation, number 1 would be this exteroception idea of the things that are coming in, the information from the environment, right? Is there a tiger on the savannah over there? Or outside us, that cues from other people that we are interpreting, well, the nervous system is interpreting, as to if we are in a space of safety or of threat or of life threat. Like safety, danger, life threat. And so that's how the navigation happens. Well, exteroception is the piece of that that's taking in the information from out here. Interoception is sort of coupled with that, and it's the information from the viscera, from inside your body, your guts, that is sending signals to the brain to say, which state are we in, or which state should we be in based on this information. It's just all doing this, right? And Stephen Porges reminds us that if you look at the numbers in terms of the percent of neurons of the vagus nerve itself and its many branches that are geared to send information this way versus from the brain down to the body, it's a larger percentage going this way, right? 80% of the neurons that are associated as part of the vagus are afferent, meaning information from the viscera, from the deep, that are going to the brain to say, here's where we're at. Here's what's going on right now. Okay? So you've got those 2 big pieces of information that the nervous system is trying to take in and adapt to, right? Are we in safety? No. Are we in danger? No. Are we in life threat? Right? It's learning, and it's cued to move us between states based on that information from here, right? And also between. So between other people, because remember that ventral part of vagus is coupled with our ability to connect with people. So with ventral vagus came the ability to utilize our cranial nerves that help us smile, right? Our facial expressions are paired with the most developed portion of our nervous system. And not just facial expressions, but also intonations of our voice. I'm trying to make my voice do weird things so you can notice that. And also the auditory centers in the brain, like the portions of the neurons that are on board when we are in a safe space are cued to where the human voice happens. The range of the human voice. Once we drop into sympathetic, though that portion of the hearing actually sort of goes offline, and now we're cued, we're hyper vigilant to high sounds, high pitches, and low rumbles. And that's because that's the range where dangerous things happen, right? A growling bear has a low sound frequency, and a screaming child actually has a high frequency. So both of those things we are paired to which state we're in. So again, part of how we're navigating is via this concept of neuroception, right? That's how the nervous system adapts between states, and also how the whole system can get hung up when we have chronic trauma, right? So what you'll find is you can have imbalances that can develop between the perception piece that's supposed to be here or here, right? If you get cued more dominantly to one, then certain kinds of conditions emerge in terms of pathologies that happen. I'll give you an example. Schizophrenia or autism. The perception of the external world, other people, connectivity goes offline. So exteroception kind of takes a back seat. Interoception is now sort of dominant over exteroception, to the point that there may not be any exteroception that's even taken in much at all. When we're talking about schizophrenia, we talk about, is a patient responding to internal stimuli? Someone can perceive things that they actually think are exteroceptive, but they're actually interoceptive because other people aren't sharing the same experience. And so, they may hear things that other people can't hear, see things that other people can't see, and that's an indication that the extero-interoceptive arm of neuroception is out of balance. So, and that happens in trauma, right? You get a greater risk of psychosis, schizophrenia, when you have trauma. Even and every time you add on certain categories of trauma, you actually increase the risk of certain kinds of things. It's pretty interesting. When we talk about, for example, autism is a similar thing. The child who's autistic cannot connect with another person. And thus, it's almost like their ventral vagus goes offline and they can't access it. Of course, you would expect, right, with trauma, this goes offline. Somebody can't access their ability to connect with people. They're also not going to be sleeping. They're also going to have issues with digestion. It's going to show up because you're not doing rest, digest, and socially engage. You cannot, or you very infrequently access it. And so it's completely understandable that somebody's, hanging out in this buzzing state of sympathetic, and then maybe dropping into dorsal vagus where they're in immobilization and freeze. Okay, so that was piece number 2, neuroception and how we navigate it. And really a third, just to flesh that out one more little bit, the other piece to keep in mind is that the nervous system actually has to be sort of trained to navigate, to attach certain kinds of cues, neurologically speaking, with different states. So safety, right? What are the cues for safety? Well, we are actually taught that with a primary caregiver as we develop as babies. So if there's this is where attachment theory kind of overlaps into polyvagal theory. If you have a secure attachment to a primary caregiver, then the cues that are taught and reinforced are, hey, you can look at the caregiver, and the caregiver gives reliable cues and feedback that this is safe. But if that caregiver is not giving reliable cues of feedback that we're in a safe space, then all the messages get a little wonky. And then you do have issues with that child further down the road doesn't necessarily, their nervous system hasn't been primed to understand how to navigate the states. And one, they may hang out in sympathetic or dorsal vagus more often, or they may have trouble moving between the states, or they may not access ventral vagus much at all. And that happens in trauma quite a bit, where it's like, what would it be like to actually sleep a normal night, 8 hours? So those kinds of things, the constellation of stuff that we see symptom-wise that emerges with trauma makes complete sense in light of which portion of the autonomic nervous system is ruling the roost. So important. And also this idea of training the nervous system in terms of teaching it how to navigate the system. Of course, just to recap what I've said in other videos, the overlap that occurs is largely between, you guessed it, the respiration. So respiration is both involuntary but also voluntary. And it's one of the easiest ways to influence what's happening and which state the autonomic nervous system thinks it's supposed to be in. So fascinating. Make sure this is where meditation and mindfulness and yoga and all these things that teach us like ways to breathe and how to prolong the exhale and change how we're breathing, all of these things come into play as regards manipulating, and I should say influencing is a better word, influencing which state your autonomic nervous system is interpreting, needs to be in charge. So that's concept number 2. Principle number 2. Principle number 3 would be this idea of co-regulation, which I love. I find this refreshing because really this theory accommodates for so much of how we're human, right? It's this idea that nervous systems are designed to co-regulate, especially with the emergence of ventral vagus. So ventral vagus came on the scene at the same time as our ability to connect with our faces and to show emotions and really the things we didn't have that makes us distinct really from the rest of the mammalian kingdom would be our ability to, primates have similar abilities with facial expressions and to cue other primates to safety and that sort of thing. So similar in that sense. But this idea of co-regulating, right? As we emerged into this new state, really, with that came from a space of cooperation. And the fact that there was a harnessing of the power of the group and cooperating together to do this safety thing as a group. And so now we have this ability to go, okay, Tim, you're on tiger watch duty, right? And so then the rest of the group can be in the cave, can be, in a space of safety. And that's where this coupling between ventral vagus, right, and the cranial nerves that affect much of the stuff with our face, our senses, emerged. The other piece with that would be the fact that then once you have this ability to be in a safe space, you now have members in the group that have to be protected, and there's this co-regulation piece that comes into play. So the fact that a caregiver and an infant, right, the caregiver is going to, those two nervous systems are going to co-regulate. The caregiver, the mother, is going to soothe when the autonomic nervous system of the infant wants to drop into fight or flight or freeze. There's going to be cueing, right, to that baby to help the baby understand we're in safety right now. And so it's interesting when you watch a child, which I've had the privilege of watching 3 children grow from birth up, through. And you watch how so much of that early development that happens is based on the primary caregiver, where, the child, as they start to learn about the world, let's say they're a 1-year-old, there's always this looking back, like, does mom think this is safe? Is this okay? Right? And constantly, facial expressions where, the smile or the sing-songy lullaby that we almost intuitively go into when we're trying to soothe a fellow mammal. If you're not a parent, watch what you do with a dog or, with a pet, you'll go up to a little animal and you'll start to kind of like smile and you'll just make your voice kind of sing-songy, and you're soothing their autonomic nervous system. You're cueing them to know that this is safe, like this is an okay environment. And that's really what we see, is this co-regulation piece where a nervous system can cue another one, and that's how that other nervous system knows, okay, we're in safety, so now we can go ventral vagus. It's fascinating. This whole theory is fascinating, and I love it. And it's really exciting because it absolutely revolutionizes how we interact with trauma, and how we can influence where we're at, because we can cue nervous systems, our own, and remind ourselves how to navigate up the chain back to ventral vagus. But again, and the central piece is this idea of co-regulation. As human beings, we are absolutely meant to connect with other people, to develop intimacy amongst other people for the benefit of each other and for the group. And that's embedded in our physiology. That's way cool. Sorry, that was an understatement for emphasis. So yeah, just understanding how this whole system works, with polyvagal theory. So that's the gist. I'll put up more at some point. I just came off doing this conference with some of my colleagues, and actually presented on this topic, in humility of like, I'm not an expert, honestly. I am just somebody who finds this fascinating, and I feel like I've had to learn more about this theory out of just necessity, to navigate trauma with my patients. So thanks for tuning in. Audio.